Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Swire Properties Lounge. Thanks very much for coming. I'm Charlie from Blueprint, the new tech-focused community in Taikoo Place. It's an accelerator and tech-focused co-working community. If you haven't visited us yet, please do come by in Taikoo Place. It is our great pleasure to be presenting a discussion between two leading figures, Sebastian and Jana, who Deborah will introduce. So it's my job now to introduce Deborah. Deborah Kahn from the Wall Street Journal. She's the executive producer of video for the Wall Street Journal and host of the weekly TV segment Digits, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen, maybe like me on the Airport Express. And she will be moderating tonight's discussion between Jana and Sebastian. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone, and welcome to our discussion this afternoon. I'd like to introduce you first to Jana Peel. Jana is the CEO of Intelligence Squared Debates. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that, the live forum for debates, which will be held here during Art Basel, which is entitled Art World is a Boys Club. So if you're interested in that debate, it's on tomorrow at 2 p.m. Next to Jana is Sebastian Quelich, who is the president and COO of Artsy. Now, Artsy is a very interesting venture where art, you can view a lot of art online. It is, its mission is to make art available to anyone, as well as a platform in order to purchase art. So we'll talk more about that a bit later. Now, when I was asked to do this, to moderate this discussion, admittedly, a lot of my work does deal with technology, and I am on the perimeters of the art world. But I was thinking about how art and technology intersect. And I went to a site called Image Atlas. I don't know if any of you have heard of this site, but I thought it was a really interesting concept. For those of you who don't know what it is it takes the top image searches and compares searches around the world from different countries. So I decided to put art and technology and see what came up. And what was interesting is how different those images were. In Germany, we had the pictures from an artist who uses floppy disks to put together portrait pictures of people together. Egypt, it took me to a page for Sinai University. And in New Zealand, there was a page about hand-drawn animation and merging with computer graphics. So I thought, okay, this is going to be kind of an easy discussion because it's so wide. We can really basically talk about anything. But it just shows you where the direction in which this space is moving and where they're intersecting. So I thought I would kick off the discussion. Let's start with Jana and ask you, Jana, where is this headed and how, in your world, is art and technology intersecting?
Thank you very much. I did something similar this morning to think about where the intersection was. And when I went to Artsy's site, I thought how interesting that the Genome Project presented us with categories like averted gaze and recline. And so on one level, I think what technology doing is democratizing the experience of accessing art, allowing people who might never have the privilege of coming to the fair to access the type of art that we're all going to see over the next couple of days. I think there's also the experience within museums that's very important. And my role in working with some museums on technological advancement is just making sure that technology really is something that enables museums to become those fiery muses and not mausoleums where art goes to die.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. So, Sebastian, you actually have a really interesting perspective on this because your background is with technology, is it not?
Correct, yeah. I have one of these strange backgrounds where I was a software engineer at Bell Laboratories and mathematics researcher, and then ended up getting sucked into the art world, as there is lots of us who have. And by way of a nonprofit art school in Buenos Aires, Argentina, But Artsy is very much this intersection. So one of our beliefs and the reason that the company was started was this idea that we have this long tradition in the art world of creating these inspirational, or maybe depending on how cynical you are, aspirational experiences around art. So the Art Basel Art Fair, or an evening sale at Christie's, or a great museum, the Louvre or MoMA. But in the digital space, you have often platforms that are just, there hasn't really been resources invested. And so we set out to hire the world's leading engineers. So we really compete with Facebook, Google, Palantir, Square, Twitter, and then designers from Apple, IDEO, also Facebook. And to really bring them together with art historians to create these kinds of experiences, a kind of intuitive, elegant interface to navigate art. And then on the other side is kind of the really hard work of convincing the art world to actually give you the art to put on the platform.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about museums and how they're exhibiting. Off the top of my head, I've noticed, especially in Hong Kong, light displays on buildings as one example of merging art and technology. But Jana, you are on the board of a lot of museums. Tell us, what are the different ways that museums are embracing technology?
I think the anchor of my interest is probably with the Tate in London. And there, about 6 months ago, we started a digital board coming out of a pilot that we did to bring Tate onto Khan Academy. How many people here know what Khan Academy is? Great. If you don't, it's an amazing free resource to do some of the things you can do on Artsy, but also it has delivered 300 million lessons online. So my interest and my experience started in doing this pilot with Tate and seeing how we could use existing technologies, using existing audiences, thinking about the 500 million people that would be in Africa in the next 20 years, under the age of 20, how they could access the assets of the museums, even if they could never get to London. Now living in America for a year, I'm also taking the opportunity to go around. 2 weeks ago, I was in Dallas, and at the DMA, I met someone very much like Sebastian, who was a software engineer, who is now the deputy director of the museum. I think the DMA Dallas Museum is at the far end of the spectrum in terms of advancement. They are heat mapping you as you come into the museum. They're monitoring your transit through the museum, and with wireless triangulation, figuring out where you spend the most time. You're gathering points towards your parking as you leave and getting all kinds of bonuses that link to e-commerce. And so it's interesting in the spectrum, if you're at DMA, there's one kind of engagement with technology, which comes from a director that is very native to this environment. 4 days ago, I was in Paris, and the biggest stick outside the biggest sign outside the Picasso Museum was "No selfie sticks allowed." So I think it's very much a spectrum. It's not one size fits all just yet.
That was actually on my list, the selfie stick. I'll tease you with it. We'll get to it later because it's a hot topic right now. But talk to me a little bit about how artists are interpreting technology. Are there any great examples today out there of things that either one of you have seen where you think, wow, that's a very interesting art exhibit?
I mean, maybe I'll talk about something slightly different, which I think is interesting that we're working on now. So we haven't announced it yet. I think I'm allowed to talk about it. I'm not sure. But it's a partnership with the Cooper Hewitt. And we are doing with them in New York in a couple of weeks an algorithm auction. So we are essentially selling both historical algorithms from kind of famous computer scientists or algorithms that have had a big impact on the world. So from the software engineer who wrote the C programming language and wrote this code that every engineer who learns to code writes the Hello World program. It's the first thing you learn to code if you write programs, to from Chris Coyne, the OkCupid matching algorithm, which matches up people based on their interests. And so this is an example which is, who knows whether this will become a collecting category and how much commercial success it will have. But the intent was to kind of put a focus on coding and kind of the beauty of code as this aesthetic exercise, and to put an emphasis on software engineers who are ultimately creating some of the things that we obsess with and the products that we're most using.
Did you want to add to that?
I wanted to jump in. We had a debate last week with Hans Ulrich Obrist, who may be known to you as a co-director of the Serpentine, which is an art space in London that I'm a trustee of. And he wrote a book with Douglas Copeland and with Shumon Basar of Tank Magazine on the extreme present. And so what's interesting is that they were looking at what it means as well, averages over, what does the future mean for our jobs, for all kinds of industries. And what I think is interesting is this idea that creativity, while it is coming so fine and close to the age and the era of algorithms, is also one of those final domains that people are suggesting can't be automated out. So I'll leave you with just one book, which is called The Second Machine Age, which Andrew McAfee and Eric Brynjolfsson wrote. And what they're doing there is just going through all the examples of what will get automated out. The MDs and the general practitioners, hopefully none in this audience, of course, but that will be perhaps replaced by the Watsons, who are better diagnosticians. The digital novelists, for example, that might have competition from AI as the networks get so big that those kind of processes can also get repeated. So I think the one safe bastion is creativity. And hopefully, while we keep enhancing and thinking about how we engage with creativity, they're very complementary and not to be cannibalized.
Okay, well, one thing I wanted to ask is, I hate to stereotype, but I couldn't think of two more different groups than the art world and technologists, right? And we're beginning to see them intersect. You were talking to me, Sebastian, about Artsy having gatherings, weekly gatherings in New York with people from these two communities. So what kind of synergy are you seeing come out of the people who are, from two different, very, very different worlds intersecting?
Yeah, so I was looking this morning and trying to think of an example, and I saw an email on one of the different listservs at Artsy that was from a woman, Jessica Bacchus, who's this kind of amazing art historian, but who's also been at Artsy now for 2 or 3 years, and she now codes. And so she was sending this email to the engineering list saying, like, how do you do a regular expression search for and then put all this code in there? It's not coming back right. And so that real intersection of people actually working across these disciplines closely together, I think is really exciting. Another example is, so on Artsy, there is about 40,000 artists that you can search, and 5 of those artists who have pages here and who are represented by galleries, etc., are artists who are also software engineers on Artsy's team. And so that real deep intersection of people who are artists, but also technologists, and people who are art historians, but are also coding, I think really gets at the heart of it. Rob Stein at Dallas, another example, which is really when Max, the director of the museum, appointed him, it's revolutionary, right? It's a guy who's running what will be one of the most important museums in the US in the next 10 to 20 years, and is a coding computer scientist.
I think what's interesting is also the generational idea of who is taking care of the technology. So this idea of even discussing post-internet makes me feel old, because I knew that if I was young enough to really be a post-internet artist, I wouldn't even think about it. It would just be part of my DNA. So I think artists like Ryan Trecarton, others like even Chao Fei, are really using technology in a way where it's like a paintbrush, it's like a program. They're not thinking about, ooh, there's this new cool thing, it's called technology. They're almost moving to figurative painting if they need to, because they know that the internet exists. So it's one of those things. I think what's interesting is how performance engages with technology, because so often you can archive paintings, you can archive visuals. How do you archive the Marina Abramovich performance? And I think many of us might have caught that moment with her ex-husband Ulay when they were in MoMA and he came and she cried, and there was this 30-second or 15-second vine. Ryan McNamara, who's an artist who won the Performer Award last year, who we brought to Hong Kong, did an amazing performance for 1,000 people in Taiwan that was never really recorded. And when I asked him what we should do about the archive, he thought it was fine. The 1,000 people were there, they experienced it, and the rest can be legend. So I think what's interesting in terms of archiving is, of course, the live material, but also what do you do with performances when increasingly performances are becoming so relevant to the post-internet age.
I was actually thinking earlier of Ai Weiwei's exhibit on Alcatraz in San Francisco, which I recently saw, and I was thinking to myself that, to create such an amazing exhibit, he probably couldn't have done it without the aid of technology, because I'm sure he designed a lot of it and had to show people how exactly to put it together. Were you going to add to that point?
No, I mean, I was just thinking, like, how might we capture on Artsy performance? You know, one of the things that we're trying to do is to create this kind of canonical database. So if you search for an artist, you can go and see both the works that are at museums as well as the works that are at galleries, the works that are in art fair. And I think for performances, it would be interesting to kind of create like hashtags that automatically get picked up by Artsy. And so you could in real time kind of be a part of this performance and document it and get all these different perspectives on it. But yeah, I don't know how high on the engineering priority list this will make it, but I think it'd be interesting.
Talk to us a little bit about buying art online, because there's some people, I guess in some ways, like the fashion world, there are some people who will buy online and there's some people who want to try on the clothing. So is there a comparison we can make in the art world? What are you seeing in terms of if someone's going to buy a very expensive piece of art, are they willing to do so online?
So it's interesting. I showed up. I was on a panel earlier today with Francois Couriel, and I said that maybe 10 years from now, the conversation around, you know, will people buy art online? Won't they? Will just be ludicrous and everyone. And he said, no, it's today. Like, I don't have any clients, and this is someone who's been at Christie's for decades, saying, you know, I don't have any clients who don't use the internet in some capacity. Maybe it's to do research, maybe it's to plan their trip to the fair, maybe it's actually to bid on Christie's instead of bidding on the phone. You know, I think that the art world is inherently social, and I think people do want these experiences. But even if you're going to have these experiences, you know, I would encourage people, you know, when you come to the fair, take out the Artsy iPhone app, and you can use that to kind of map what's, you know, see all the works by a particular artist and where they are at the fair, or as an entry point. So today I think we had Jeffrey Deitch pick highlights from the fair as a kind of point to walk around. But you know, in the grand scheme, you know, my 2-year-old son was swiping the TV screen at that age, right? So it's very clear that it's not going to be a question for him of is he comfortable online or not.
I think it's also a matter of how much time you have. So what Francois, who has been at Christie's for about 50 years, might be saying is that he doesn't have any clients who would not respond to a JPEG that he has sent them, or someone from his team has directly sent them and suggested that you might be interested in this Christopher Williams photograph. I think, there's a spectrum of personalization, which at the moment does mean that there's probably a higher hit rate when there's some manual intervention in terms of buying art online. I think the more that technology is used for these transactions, the smarter the technology will become. So of course, that will be able to service you better personally. I also think that nothing will ever replace the feeling of being in a live environment, standing in front of a Mark Rothko or Zheng Fengzhe. And for that reason, I think that there will always be that idea of, do you have 1 minute? Do you have 5 minutes? Do you have 5 days? Do you have $500, $1,000? Can you get on the plane to go see something? So I think, like when fire was created, that was a scary technology and people cried arson. I think eventually these technologies will become part of the commonplace, but will just complement all these different spheres. I don't think anything will ever supplant the real experience, but there might not always be the time or the ability to collapse that gap.
So Sebastian, are you saying, to follow up on your point, that it's not the end of the galleries then? I mean, you know, some people feel like, oh, if you can see it online, what's the point of going to the gallery?
No, I mean, I think if anything, there may be more disruption to galleries from some of the new models of artist representation. So, you know, was it UTA that announced that they're representing artists? More so, Artsy is very much a platform that's serving galleries. So we have 3,000 galleries that are on the site, and what we do is help them to reach a larger audience. So we don't work directly with artists. We're a platform for the galleries. And I think it's very much, you know, there's a certain part of the job which is finding collectors and creating kind of a more accessible site that many people can find as a first entry point, and that we can do really well. But the job of managing an artist's career and putting them in the right collections and advising them, that's really something that requires a human, and it's more kind of strategy consulting and kind of creative problem solving than the types of problems like finding an audience that the internet is really good for.
Can I ask how many people in this audience have either bought a piece of art online or created art that's been enhanced by technology?
A clear minority. Let's open it up to questions. Who has a question for Jana or Sebastian? In the back there. Do we have a microphone yet?
You've talked a lot, I'm Grace, and you've talked a lot about how artists are embracing technology, but I just wanted to ask a question with regards to technologists embracing art. So I work at a company called Hanson Robotics where we're making humanoid robots. So we really have to embrace art in order to create the sculptures for the human face and work out which motors to actuate in order to produce a smile or a frown. And for me, that's like the art of tech at the moment. So I wondered if you had any other examples of technologists who you think are embracing tech in a positive way for their product or for their business.
Well, I think if we look at a perfect marriage of design and technology and art, if we look at Johnny Ive and the Apple Watch, for example, that will eventually, I think, become one of those devices where you can have a museum on your wrist, and you can also look at the evolution of design. I think that's a very interesting point about what technology is doing for artists, whether technology is enhancing careers or limiting careers. It's a big question. We see what's happening in music. We see what's happening with books. Is Amazon good for the reader? Is Amazon good for the writer? Sure, you're reaching much wider audiences. There are questions in those spheres with music and books, whether that is bringing enough reward to the content creator. I think those are all big philosophical questions we need to be thoughtful of as we move into this space, to make sure we're protecting the rights and the interests of the artists first and foremost.
The gentleman up front.
Just wanted to ask a question. You talked about sort of social, not exactly replacing the gallery and there being a space for the gallery. I work in the social media business myself, and I think that one of the things I see from social is actually it doesn't really cause people to, I think the idea of it was to actually find things that they weren't necessarily interested in their main point of focus. But actually social basically reinforces people's beliefs, and what you get is this kind of actually narrowing of people's, concentration. And I find that galleries or events like this have this serendipity of you walk around and you find something that you're interested in. And I wonder how, for example, Artsy is there's a balance between the serendipity of the experience for the user and also kind of actually serving content that is of interest to that user, and how you balance that line.
No, I think it's a great question. I had a conversation, I remember years ago, with Andrea Rosen, the art dealer, who was saying one of the concerns she had is that as you have all this information on Artsy, you could kind of put up top 10 lists and it would just reinforce kind of everyone buying the same artist. And I think on the one hand, that is true, and so you have to be thoughtful around what you put up and how you present the data. On the other hand, these things really allow people to just find much more art that they would never see. And so I think it's, if you're thoughtful and are thinking about that and are not just driven by, okay, how can I get the maximum number of views, and so that everyone is just looking at Warhol or Picasso, etc. I think it can be, net positive.
I think that's a great point about groupthink. If you think about what culture is being fed to you, one example is how House of Cards was developed for the US market, and there was a reverse engineering of what has been the most popular British television show, who is the most popular British actor, what does the community want to see, and that worked really well. I think there's also those questions, as you say, not just giving people what they think they want, because you'll get in the situation with the Model T Ford, if you asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So you need innovators, and you really need that kind of creative destruction to make sure that we're always progressing in the cultural space.
But, I mean, one of the things we do is try and balance between what we show you algorithmically, as well as getting people like Jana and other kind of leading figures in the art world to make choices from the fair, so you have this kind of human dimension as well as, you know, frankly, the algorithms are very far from working really well, so there's just some serendipity in the errors, to be honest.
That's not for Twitter.
Sebastian, I'm curious, how much do you know about your users?
So not as much as we'd like right now. It's a conversation as we've started now considering starting to work with brands. We realize that there's probably a lot more that we could start knowing about our users. But there's some segment of the users that we know a lot about. So about 7 to 8% of users on Artsy are commercial, and so they make inquiries with galleries. And in those cases, we tend to get more information as they inquire with galleries, and often galleries want to get more information about who they are. We have cases where, so for example, one of the things we've started doing recently is if you make an inquiry on Artsy and we just send it to the gallery, and we don't know, does it result in a sale or not? But we send out emails to people who inquire that say, introducing Artsy confirmed buyer status. And if you respond back and we verify that you've bought a work, anytime you get introduced to a gallery in the future, the gallery will take you more seriously and will give you access to fair previews a day in advance. And so that starts to create kind of much richer profiles for a portion of our users.
Question here, please.
I have a question for Artsy. Just now you mentioned about, you know, getting that referral to galleries. What else would you like to, how else would you like to leverage on that big data you have behind Artsy and do something avant-garde with that data and enhance that experience between art and the user on Artsy?
I mean, I think that's very much an ongoing process, right? So we're a technology company. We push out code and update the site multiple times a day. And so the experience of viewing art on the site is just constantly evolving, from little things such as, you know, optimizing a page so that the user experience is more seamless, that there's better conversions, that people have a better experience with the art, to bigger things such as this year, for the first time, we're starting to do online auctions. So with galleries and art fairs, we're essentially a lead gen business. We send clients to the galleries. With auction houses, people can actually bid directly on Artsy at auctions. And so it really is a range. And then, of course, on kind of the educational side, there's about 500 museums on the site that use Artsy to reach a larger audience and where there is no commercial component.
In the back, next to you. Sorry. Thanks.
Hi, say I'm an art investor. Have you guys built any algorithms that can crawl all the artists you guys have and predict who's likely to appreciate in value? Have you appeared to any of this target segment?
So we haven't done that. We have a lot of data, and we've been approached about doing those kinds of things. I don't know if in the future that might make sense. Now we're really just focused on building the foundation and creating an experience and adding more art to the site. It's only, I would say, kind of in the last year or so that we've kind of reached a critical mass where I think we're providing a lot of value to both the users, the galleries, the art fairs, etc.
How many users do you guys have on the site? If I can ask that question. I just downloaded the app right now, and to admit, it's very beautiful. The experience is nice to browse. It's just I wish I could benchmark the artists a little bit, benchmark price points, different stuff.
But see, if I was an Artsy user who had the pure desire to go and experience Artsy and not feel like a product, I think there's interesting questions around that when big data for you becomes something that's a product, then you then monetize. So it's a really interesting question because everywhere people are looking at how many searches. In this book they mentioned, if you search how many real estate searches there are for Hong Kong, it's likely that in 6 months, if there's a lot of traffic, the market will start to move, and you can predict obviously better in hedge funds you're doing this.
Yes.
It would be an interesting question to Sebastian if he did take the data from these
From search
benign
engines or
users
Twitter or stuff like this, and then
without making one feel compromised unless you were opting in and being part of a product. Jonathan Zittrain said, if you're not being asked to pay for something on the internet, you are the product, right?
Yes.
So there's interesting questions about how you would move from a commercial transactional model to the client or the user being the product itself.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is one way we use the data is to try and predict what the demand will be for a specific gallery, museum, or art fairs program on a per artist level. And so we have essentially something called an Artsy demand calculator, which gives us some sense of what the audience demand might be. And that can help a gallery kind of set realistic expectations about showing, about essentially the value of being on the Artsy site. But it's something that we're very careful with, and we don't publish, for example, though I'm sure it would be incredibly popular, popularity lists on the site and things like that. So it goes back to the same question about being thoughtful with how you use the data.
I have a question on that, though. The fact that platforms like Artsy makes art available to people who normally wouldn't be, do you think that that may have an influence on the price of things?
I think that it's hard to predict what impact it will have on pricing. I think it should make the market much, much larger. So, right now in the U.S., and obviously you don't have to be a millionaire to collect art, but I saw some statistic that 98% of millionaires in the U.S. do not buy art, right? So it's this like weird personality quirk to actually buy art, despite the fact that we all have walls, we're aesthetic beings, and I think that really begins with education, and it's people getting exposed to it and not having kind of the intimidation from not knowing about art. So I think there is an opportunity for the market to be much, much bigger than it is today.
I also think there's the idea of posters, which obviously at a different end of the spectrum, but for us at Tate, Serpentine, limited editions and posters are a very big segment of the line items on e-commerce. So I think also increasingly in terms of accessibility, if you need something hanging over your sofa, I think there's also in art, which is not necessarily Rudolf Stingel or Jeff Koons, there's also a wide spectrum of art where people's lives can be enriched, and maybe the internet is there to expose the wide variety of what art could mean, apart from an Athena poster of the Matisse Blue Dancer that we all had at college.
Charlie.
Sebastian, can you talk about the technology used to capture the images themselves? Do the galleries usually provide the photos on the website? Do you have a service in which you can go document the pieces?
No, I mean, the galleries, what's great now, digital cameras are so cheap and such high quality that everyone has images which are more than good enough. Of course, as galleries start seeing, we provide data around how having high resolution images, having additional install shots, etc., having really high quality images. But it's interesting, with the Instagram phenomenon, there is just people are used to kind of creating beautiful images, and so almost it's very rare that we get bad quality images.
Let me ask you about Instagram, because I'm always surprised that Instagram has not, I always think Instagram is the most terrific platform for transaction of art. And I'm thinking if we look 5 years down the line, do you see a partnership with Instagram? Do you see a moment where we're sitting back in a taxi with 5 minutes, and whether it's $100 postcard or poster, whatever it might be, do you see Instagram as a transactional platform? Because it is so popular in terms of its expression of art and how we use it in the art world.
It's an interesting question. I think on the kind of direct collector level, I think one of the issues is that it's not very structured. And so it's got the kind of, in the moment, you can broadcast something to someone, but it's harder if you're doing a kind of more directed search. So if you go and search for Andy Warhol, Artsy will be the top commercial search result you'll get. And the reason is because you can go and see works from the Dallas Museum of Art and from many galleries and now auction houses and art fairs. And so I think it depends on whether it's a directed search or not. To the larger question, I think doing something with Kevin and Instagram might be great.
Good idea. May, here in the front, please.
I invest in technology, and so far you guys have talked very interestingly about the application of technology towards art or how to utilize it. But I think that we're in a period where there's going to be accelerated innovation. You know, we haven't even seen things that really come out of digital natives where it's so natural to them they speak the language, right? But I would like to ask the question about creativity and technology. I mean, because you see this, right? All of you see this. And so what is it that you've seen that's not like the wearable technology, that's not the, you know, that next generation Instagram or anything that you've seen that's really innovative, that's going to kind of be really a game changer in the area of creativity, whether it's tactile or whether it's virtual or however it's presented, right? Because I think it's going to change the art form once the language changes and technology becomes the language of the machine and also of men, right?
It's interesting, if you just look at a quick example, the Triennale that Massimiliano Gianni curates at the New Museum is an example right now, it opened last week, of artists working with new technology. There's probably about 3 LED screens in there. There's paintings by Firenze Lai. So when we talk about artists using technology and innovations in technology, there's such interesting ideas. There's a transgender artist that has created an artwork using multimedia that you probably wouldn't see. It's just hard to extricate the technology from the openness and the philosophy of being able to operate in the stage. I think Hans-Ulrich Obrist's project after '89 is also interesting. He's taken this subset of artists that were all born after '89. But again, not everything they are doing is our perception of working in 3D with robotics like you're doing at Hansen. I think it's just much more natural, and that creativity is something that you can see at this fair, at Parasite, at Asia Art Archive, at Spring, and that's not always as obvious. It's just really creative people thinking in disruptive ways all the time.
Is 3D printing changing the art industry? Can you think of any examples?
I mean, there's certainly artists working in 3D printing. I saw work recently from Haley Mellon, but there's lots of great artists working in 3D printing, and I think more broadly, you know, it's kind of desktop publishing. There's the guy who used to run Wired, I can't remember his name, who talks about kind of desktop publishing being kind of one revolution, and then the internet being kind of the next one, and now 3D printing being the next one, where essentially actual physical distribution and creation has become essentially cheap and ubiquitous. And I think that will, as all parts of culture do, like it has to impact the art making.
But it's interesting, I had a talk once with Richard Anderson, who wrote this book,
Yes.
as you're saying, makers. And in the room were Martino Gamper and Ron Arad, and he said, we are all designers now. And they said, excuse me, what have you seen made, you know, from 3D printing that wasn't a great little Christmas present or a trinket of some sort or a belt loop? And so for the designers, for them, it's still this moment of, yes, there are maker communities, yes, 3D printing is accelerating certain things, but someone has to program the machine, right? Someone has to program the algorithm. And until that happens and singularity sets in, there's still got to be someone, although a lot of roles might get automated out.
Oh no, but I think that creative kind of problem solving, you know, our hardest, kind of most challenging positions to fill are the product designers at the company. And it's just incredibly difficult. People who kind of have the visual sense, the kind of strategic business and product sense, and then can actually themselves, you know, program them. It's really, really difficult positions, and there is, you know, Facebook, for example, we will be like sending love poems to a designer in, you know, Sweden for a year and a half, trying to get him to come, and then we'll find out that Facebook just bought the studio to hire that one person away. And so it's really an area where I think there will be huge growth, and especially as kind of higher quality design becomes expected across all industries and across all products.
First there, and then we'll come up here.
Thanks so much. So you mentioned earlier, this is a question for Artsy specifically, I think. You mentioned earlier how Artsy is a site that services galleries and that gives art consumers or art enthusiasts or art buyers access to a much broader audience of artists than they would have exposure to normally. But what about the reverse of that question? Like, in what ways do you think that technology in general or Artsy specifically could give artists who haven't been discovered yet, who aren't being represented by a gallery or by a PR firm, give them access to a much broader audience of buyers or gallerists or PR or whatever?
Yeah, so we've looked around, and essentially there's other platforms that do that, such as Saatchi Online, etc. And we've chosen this particular model from kind of a scalability perspective. If nothing else, it's, managing relationships with a few thousand galleries is easier than with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of artists. I think we can serve artists from a lot of artists use the site to kind of find out what's going on, etc. But we don't work directly with them, but I think there is other platforms.
Let's have last question up here.
Hi, this is for Jana. Going back to the comment that you made about the performance and how it was just for 1,000 people and they were satisfied with that, it made me think a little bit of Snapchat and how there's this kind of pushback against the constant sort of documentation of everything and how it kind of continues to exist forever. So I wonder if you can discuss a little bit the ephemeral aspects of art and how that's also an important part of the discussion when it comes to technology. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm always thinking about that. The other day I was in a museum and we were all crowded around a sign trying to understand this caption around war photography. And as we were crowded there, I thought, this is so annoying. I wish I just had an app and I could be on my iPhone and I could be walking freely through the gallery and not have to be in this huddled mass. And then I had a really neat conversation with someone who was standing beside me who happened to be a war correspondent. And I thought, okay, I'm so tormented and torn as well, because in terms of even the experience of appreciating art, do you want to be told, like Marina Abramovich, you need to leave your phone in the locker, right? So for 600 hours, I will be in this space. You cannot document me. You can go out and tell people. Vito Acconci in the 70s, there was the piece Seedbed, and he lay underground and he masturbated. And that's become the stuff of legend. None of us have ever seen it, but yet somehow there's like a black and white video that no one can really decipher, and yet it's the stuff of legend. And as you say, the visual is gone, but yet it remains. So I'm very torn. On one hand, I really want the ease of walking through an exhibition, of just being in my own space, of sharing an image if I need to, of taking a selfie with a selfie stick in front of Dora Maar because I want the four of us to be in this picture. On the other hand, I realized there's so much that we do in our own universe, in our own vortex of, selfishness. Maybe there is a domain and a medium that we will get to where you do document and you do preserve, but you also enjoy the people around you, because I think we all find as creators, your biggest facilitator is technology, but it's also your biggest competition, because you could all be sitting on your iPhones right now and then we'd feel really dumb.
Sebastian, and you have to mention the selfie stick because I promised we would end on that point.
The selfie stick, yeah, I saw this morning where the museums that have banned the selfie sticks, the museums that are allowing them, and then the Met that is, their official position is that they're undecided. And so the Board of Trustees is debating whether the selfie stick will be allowed at the Met. So write to the Met and tell them that you believe the selfie stick should or shouldn't be there.
Okay, thanks very much. Long live the selfie stick. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for a Blueprint conversation on art and technology.